There was a street that had no beginning and no end. It appeared only when the city slept, when its heart slowed, and even the rats beneath the cobblestones dreamed. It was not marked on any map, nor remembered by any cartographer, for it did not wish to be found. The few who stumbled upon it by accident forgot the way as soon as they left. Some said the street moved, sliding between layers of the city like a loose page in an old book. Others whispered that it existed not in space, but between hours, a thin corridor stitched from the silence between one tick and the next. Its name was Hollow Street. It was narrow, crooked, and impossibly still. The air there did not move. It only remembered movement. Lanterns lined the way, but their flames did not burn with fire. They glowed faintly from within, like captured stars dying very slowly. The cobblestones were uneven, each one carved with marks that resembled letters from an alphabet no one had ever seen. If you listened closely, you could hear a faint humming from beneath them. Not a sound, but a pulse, as if something vast and ancient was sleeping under the street itself. And at the farthest end stood a small shop with warped glass and a door of blackened oak. The door had no handle. A single brass key was nailed above it, and under the key hung a sign written in flaking silver paint, "The Horologist of Lost Moments." Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. Hundreds of clocks crowded the walls, grand and small, pendulums and pocket watches, all whispering their rhythm into the gloom. No two ticked the same. The noise was chaotic, but not random. It was as though each clock was playing its own melody, and together they formed a strange, living symphony. Behind a counter covered in gears and broken glass sat Eldrick Morn, the Clockmaker of Hollow Street. No one knew his age. His skin was pale like candle wax, his eyes a glacial blue that seemed to see through time rather than through people. His hair hung to his shoulders, silver and tangled, and his coat was patched from dozens of fabrics, black velvet, sailor's canvas, priest's cloth, as though stitched from the remnants of lives once lived. He wore gloves to hide his hands, but when he forgot to put them on, you could see faint lines of brass embedded in his skin, running along his veins like thin wires. He was not entirely human anymore. They said he had once been an ordinary craftsman, a maker of clocks for noblemen and kings. But one day, the Queen of the Northern Isles came to him, begging for a clock that could hold her husband's dying breath, so that she could hear his voice every night. Eldrick built it, a clock that whispered when wound. Yet the Queen's grief was endless. She wound it again and again until the voice faded, twisted, and finally screamed. After that, Eldrick disappeared. Years later, Hollow Street began to appear, and inside it, the ticking started. Eldrick had learned something no mortal was meant to know: how to trap time. Each clock in his shop contained a moment that someone could not bear to let go. A heartbeat, a promise, a death. The air shimmered with memory. It was heavy with everything that had ever been loved and lost. When Eldrick worked, the candles flickered backwards, their wax rising instead of falling, and the sound of ticking became the sound of breathing. He lived by one rule: time lends, never gives. One night, the fog outside was thick enough to hide even the moon. The city beyond Hollow Street had fallen asleep, and the shop was glowing faintly, like a lantern adrift in a sea of silence. Eldrick sat at his work table, bending over a half-finished clock whose face was carved from mother of pearl. His fingers moved with machine precision, yet every gesture carried something mournful, almost tender. The ticking of 1,000 clocks surrounded him, but he barely heard it anymore. It had become his heartbeat. Then suddenly, the ticking faltered. One by one, the clocks began to slow. Eldrick looked up. "Ah," he murmured, "another lost soul?" The door creaked open, though no hand touched it. A gust of cold air entered, and with it a girl. She looked no older than 17, wrapped in a dark shawl, her boots soaked with rain. Her hair was the color of chestnuts, but streaked with silver at the ends, as though she'd walked too long under the stars. She carried a small bundle wrapped in black fabric, cradling it like a wounded bird. Eldrick studied her in silence. "You're not from this hour," he said at last. "I followed the sound," she whispered. "The ticking led me here." "Few can hear it," Eldrick replied. "Fewer survive it." She stepped forward, unwrapping the cloth. Inside was a small, broken pocket watch. The glass was cracked, the hands frozen at 12:03, and inside the casing was a lock of dark hair tied with a crimson thread. "I was told you could make time move again," she said. Eldrick leaned closer. "For whom?" "My brother," she whispered. "He drowned last winter. They pulled him from the river, but he still had this watch in his hand. It stopped the moment he died." Eldrick's eyes softened. "You seek what cannot be returned." She looked at him fiercely. "Then return what can." He smiled faintly, not in amusement, but in recognition. "You remind me of someone," he said. "A queen who begged the same thing long ago. Her wish ruined a kingdom." "I don't care about kingdoms," Lyra said. "I just want to hear his voice again, just once." At that, something changed in the air. The clocks began to hum in unison. Eldrick rose from his seat and reached for a set of tools that gleamed faintly in the candlelight. Tweezers, a loop, a knife so thin it could cut between seconds. He set the broken watch upon the table. "Very well," he said. "But you must understand, when you call something back, it does not always come alone." As he worked, the sound of rain outside began to move backward, drops rising from puddles, climbing the windows, returning to the clouds. The candles flickered blue. Eldrick opened the casing of the watch, and something pale and luminescent seeped out, like fog trapped in glass. Lyra gasped. Within the fog, she saw flashes, a boy running across a bridge, laughter echoing, a hand reaching into water. "What is that?" she whispered. "The residue of a moment," Eldrick said. "Every death leaves an imprint on the hour it happened. Yours has not faded yet." He began assembling gears no larger than dust motes, whispering words that were not quite human. The hands of the watch twitched. The ticking started again, faint, fragile, but real. "Now," Eldrick said. "Listen." Lyra lifted the watch to her ear. For a moment, only the soft rhythm of time. Then, a voice. "Lyra, you're late again." She froze. It was him, her brother's voice, distant but alive. "Rin." He laughed softly, the sound warm and full. "Don't cry. You'll make the river flood again." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I miss you." "I know," the voice said, "but time doesn't end. It just forgets to remember us." The ticking stopped. The watch turned cold in her hands. "Please," she begged, "just once more." Eldrick shook his head. "If you call him again, he'll have to answer from where time has no shape, and that place devours what listens." Lyra hesitated, trembling. Then she lowered the watch. "I understand." Eldrick nodded and took it gently from her hands. "He's safe now," he said. "You gave him a voice again, but voices are heavier than souls. They sink." When she looked up, the watch had dissolved into mist. On the table remained a small silver gear, and a single tear, trapped inside it like a jewel. "What do I owe you?" she whispered. Eldrick smiled faintly. "You already paid. You came back." Outside, Hollow Street had begun to fade. The fog curled like smoke, swallowing the lamps one by one. Lyra turned. The shop was already gone. She looked down at her palm, where the silver gear shimmered faintly, and though she did not hear ticking, she could feel it, deep beneath her ribs, a quiet, steady rhythm that wasn't hers. When she finally left the street, the world resumed its sound. But somewhere beneath the cobblestones, deep within the marrow of Hollow Street, a clock began to turn again, one that hadn't moved in centuries. Its hands pointed to 12:04, and far away, in the fog between worlds, something smiled. When Lyra vanished into the night, and the last echo of her footsteps dissolved, Hollow Street exhaled, a long shivering sigh that rippled through its stones like the breath of something awakening. The lanterns dimmed, and the fog coiled inward, wrapping itself around the clockmaker's shop as though shielding it from the world outside. Eldrick Morn remained motionless at his worktable. The candles had burned out without smoke or scent, leaving only the cold glimmer of the clocks, hundreds of tiny suns pulsing in slow unison. He stared at the space where Lyra had stood, his gloved hand hovering above the silver gear she had left behind. The gear still gleamed faintly, turning once every few heartbeats without being touched. Each turn made the air shudder. He whispered, 12:04. The words hung in the air like frost, and for an instant all the clocks stopped again. Eldrick closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids he saw not darkness, but water, endless black water, and beneath it reflections of faces long gone, a queen with eyes like glass, a boy with laughter caught mid-breath, a girl whose voice trembled with defiance. He rose slowly from his stool. His legs ached as if rust had settled into his bones. When he moved, faint clinks echoed, the sound of metal within flesh. He walked toward the back of the shop, where a trapdoor waited beneath an ancient rug woven with constellations that didn't exist in any sky. He pulled the rug aside. The trapdoor had no handle, only an indentation shaped like a hand. Eldrick pressed his palm against it. The brass lines in his skin lit up, glowing faintly gold, and the wood sighed open. A breath of cold air drifted up from below. He descended the narrow staircase, and with each step the ticking grew softer until it was no longer sound, but pulse. Below the shop lay the Chamber of Hours. It was not built by human hands. The walls were carved from polished stone that shimmered with faint reflections, and at the center stood a great glass sphere taller than a man. Inside the sphere floated thousands of golden fragments, each one spinning slowly, like dust motes suspended in sunlight. They were not dust, they were seconds. Each fragment was a stolen heartbeat, a borrowed breath, a memory that had once belonged to someone living. The sphere hummed softly, feeding the clocks above with its imprisoned time. Eldrick approached it with reverence and guilt. He pressed his palm to the surface. The glass rippled like water. Images flickered inside. His own hands crafting a watch, a woman laughing beside a clock tower, a city burning. Too long, he whispered. I've borrowed too long. He could feel it. Time itself had begun to reject him. Every hour he lived was an hour someone else lost. Every minute he crafted was taken from another's life. He remembered the beginning, though memory was cruel now, fragmented, unreliable, as though he were remembering a dream someone else had dreamed. Once he had been mortal, a craftsman with a wife and a son. Their laughter filled the little workshop that faced the sea. His wife, Erin, sang as she polished the glass faces of clocks. His son, Bram, collected sand in tiny jars, labeling each one with the hour he found it. The sand from the morning we saw the whales, the sand from the day the bells stopped ringing. Then came the storm. The sea rose without warning, black and furious, devouring the coast. Eldrick had been repairing the governor's tower clock when it struck midnight. The bell tolled once, and never again. He ran home through rain and thunder, but the water had already claimed everything. Aaron and Bram were gone. Only the clock on his wall remained, its hand spinning backward, mocking him. That was when he first heard the whisper. It came from inside the clock, a voice soft as ash. "You can hold them if you learn to hold time." Eldrick had believed it. He tore the clock open, found the gears trembling like living things, and beneath them a small glass seed. The seed pulsed faintly with light. When he touched it, the world froze. Raindrops hung in the air like jewels. The wind stopped mid-song, and somewhere far beneath the silence he heard a second ticking, slow, ancient, patient. That was the moment Eldrick ceased being a man and became something else, a keeper of the in-between. He had built Hollow Street after that, not with tools or stones, but with stolen seconds. Every brick was a heartbeat, every lamp a trapped memory of dawn. It was his refuge and his prison, and for centuries he had waited there, repairing broken clocks for souls who wandered too far from their own hours. Each one came seeking something, a voice, a face, a moment they'd lost. Each one left with less than they hoped, and more than they understood. But Lara was different. When she entered, the clocks did not resist her. They sang. He could still feel the echo of her brother's voice, faint, trembling through the gears like the last note of a song not meant to end. And for the first time in an age, Eldrick felt something stir in him that wasn't cold machinery. Hope, or perhaps its ghost. He turned from the sphere and crossed the chamber to a small pedestal where an hourglass stood. Unlike any other, this one contained no sand. Inside it drifted light, golden, swirling softly between its glass bulbs. It was his hour, the last one he truly owned. He had been saving it for the moment he could let go, the hour of his death. But time, it seemed, refused to claim him until he returned what he'd stolen. Eldrick reached out, then hesitated. His reflection in the glass was faint, almost transparent. The lines of brass beneath his skin glowed like veins of fire. He whispered to himself, "If she found the way here once, she may find it again." He turned the hourglass upside down. The light within began to fall, slowly, beautifully, and the chamber trembled. The glass sphere cracked just slightly, releasing a single fragment of time that rose like a spark and vanished into the darkness above. A sound echoed then, soft, like laughter carried by wind. But it was not Lyra's laughter, it was Aaron's. Eldrick fell to his knees. "No," he whispered, "not yet. Please, not yet." But time does not hear prayers. It only answers debts. The light from the broken sphere spread across the floor, climbing the walls like liquid dawn. The clocks above began to toll, not in unison, but in grief. Each one rang a different note, forming a mournful harmony that filled the city's sleeping heart. Far above, in the mortal streets, people stirred in their dreams. They heard bells tolling somewhere deep beneath their consciousness. Bells that spoke not of warning or celebration, but of remembrance. A mother dreamed of her lost child smiling. A soldier dreamed of a dawn that never came. An old man dreamed of his wife's hands brushing dust from his cheek. And through it all, Hollow Street began to pulse again, brighter, stronger, alive. Eldrick stood amid the glow, trembling. The brass lines on his skin pulsed faster now, as if something inside him were rewinding. He looked up through the cracks in the chamber ceiling and saw the faint outline of Lyra's face reflected there, distant, asleep somewhere far beyond the veil of time, clutching the silver gear he'd given her. He smiled faintly. "Good," he whispered. "Keep the hour safe." Then, as the final drop of light fell through the hourglass, everything went still. For the first time in centuries, Hollow Street went completely silent. No ticking, no humming, only the faint sigh of something vast, something satisfied. And in that silence, Eldrick closed his eyes and saw the sea again. But this time, the storm had passed. Aaron was waiting by the shore. Bram ran toward him, laughing. The waves whispered as they pulled him home. Yet above the empty shop, in the fog of the city, the door of the horologist of lost moments remained ajar. And though the clocks were gone, one faint sound still echoed from beneath the floorboards. Not ticking, but breathing. Something new had begun to wake. When Lyra awoke, dawn had not yet broken. The sky outside her window glowed faintly violet, a strange, bruised light that did not belong to morning or night. Her heart still carried the echo of a dream she couldn't quite remember, though she knew it had been full of waves and laughter and a name she couldn't recall. The clock on her bedside table ticked softly. Then it didn't. Then it ticked again, slower, as though uncertain which direction to move. Lyra sat up. Her room looked the same, the pale wallpaper, the books stacked unevenly, the raincoat hanging by the door. But something inside the air felt folded, like reality had been bent and then smoothed out again, not quite perfectly. When she reached for the clock, it was warm, and beneath the ticking, she heard something else. Breathing. That day never quite began. Lyra dressed, made tea, fed the stray cat that slept by her window, and stepped into the street. But the morning didn't arrive. The same gray pre-dawn lingered no matter how long she walked. People moved about in a slow rhythm, speaking without sound, their mouths forming words that dissolved before reaching her ears. She tried asking someone for the time. A man with an umbrella smiled absently, showing teeth that gleamed like polished porcelain. "It's still early," he said, though his eyes didn't seem to focus on her. When she looked away, his reflection in a nearby window didn't move with him. It stayed behind, staring at her, its mouth whispering something she couldn't hear. Lyra began to run. She didn't know where she was going, only that her feet carried her through winding alleys and fog-laced corners until, somehow, she found herself standing before the end of a street she had never meant to find. Hollow Street. Only this time, it wasn't deserted. The lamps flickered faintly, glowing like fireflies caught in glass. The air hummed softly, and a thin silver mist wound through the cobblestones like smoke from an invisible fire. The shop at the end, the clockmaker's shop, still stood there, but its door was wide open. Lyra hesitated. The last thing she remembered of that place was a whisper and the sound of her brother's voice. But the pull was irresistible, that same quiet magnetism that had drawn her there before. She stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, brass, and rain. All the clocks were gone. Every wall that once held hundreds of ticking hearts was now bare, except for faint outlines in the dust where they had hung. The workbench was covered in scattered gears and shards of glass, as though someone had left in a hurry. On the floor, half buried beneath the rubble, something pulsed faintly blue. It was her clock, the one Eldrick had made for her. She knelt, brushed the dust away, and lifted it gently. It was cold, too cold, and when she looked closely, she saw tiny cracks spreading across its face like frost. Inside, the second hand was twitching, unable to move forward. Lyra whispered, "You're not supposed to exist anymore?" The clock answered with a sound, a slow, shivering chime that rippled through the air. The entire room shifted. The dust on the shelves began to fall upward, and then the whisper, soft, layered, echoing from every direction. "Lyra Ventor, you listened too long." She spun around, heart hammering. "Who's there?" No one answered, only the faint rustling of the rug behind the counter. It moved as if something beneath it had just exhaled. Lyra lifted the rug and found the trap door. She hesitated, but the whisper came again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, help him." The stairs descended deeper than she expected. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of oil and salt. When she reached the bottom, she stood in a vast underground chamber, faintly glowing with golden light. It was not empty. In the center stood the broken glass sphere Eldrick had once tended. Cracks veined its surface, and inside it swirled thousands of fragments, seconds, minutes, hours, all moving chaotically, colliding and merging, their light flickering like lightning trapped underwater. The hum that filled the air was deafening. It wasn't one sound, but millions. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper that had ever been stolen. They collided like waves, forming words that almost made sense. "Return the hour, return the hour." Lyra clutched the blue clock tighter. Its face now glowed, responding to the chorus. She saw movement at the edge of the chamber. A figure, or what remained of one, slumped near the pedestal. Brass veins glimmered beneath translucent skin. Eldrick. His eyes were open, though he didn't seem to see her. The brass lines in his hands were dimming, flickering like embers fading in ash. Lyra rushed to him, kneeling beside his body. "Eldrick, it's me!" His lips moved slowly, voice grinding like old gears. "You shouldn't have come. Hollow Street is ending." "What happened?" "The hourglass," he rasped. "I turned it. I thought I could give back what I stole, but time does not forgive what it remembers." The sphere behind him pulsed violently, sending waves of heat through the air. Cracks spread along the floor, glowing molten gold. Lyra's clock vibrated in her hand. "It's reacting to you." Eldrick managed a weak smile. "Because it carries my final hour. I gave it to you. I wanted to end the keeping. I don't understand." He lifted a trembling hand, touching her chest. "You're not meant to, but time does. It knows you now." The moment his fingers brushed her, the chamber shifted. The light folded inward, and suddenly Lyra was seeing through him, through memories not her own. She saw the sea swallowing the city. She saw a woman and child smiling in a home filled with clocks. She saw Eldrick's hands shaking as he held the glass seed that stopped the storm. And then she saw something else, something vast, endless, and wrong. An eye, made not of flesh, but of turning rings of light, staring from beyond time. It blinked once, and the entire vision shattered. Lyra stumbled backward, gasping. Eldrick was gone. Only a faint shimmer of gold lingered in the air where he had been. The sphere had gone still, but the whispers had not stopped. They grew louder, overlapping until they became a chorus of countless voices, all murmuring her name. Lyra clutched the clock, and it pulsed violently once, twice, 3 times, before its glass shattered, releasing a blinding surge of light that filled the chamber. When it faded, everything was silent again, except the ticking. Thousands of clocks now lined the chamber walls, not the same as before, but new, gleaming, alive. Each one ticked in perfect unison, and at the center of them all stood Lyra. Her reflection gleamed faintly in the curved glass of the nearest clock. Brass lines traced her hands. Her eyes glowed softly, catching the golden light. She whispered, horrified, "No." The clocks answered together, 1,000 ticking voices forming one word. "Keeper." Above, Hollow Street returned to existence. Its lamps burned bright again, and the fog withdrew like a receding tide. The nameless shop stood whole, its door closed, its windows glowing faintly blue. People who wandered too far that night said they heard ticking behind the walls, steady, soothing, eternal. A voice hummed softly within the rhythm, a woman's voice, calm and kind. They said if you stood long enough by the door, you'd hear it whisper your name, and the sound of the one you'd lost whispering back. No one ever entered twice. But deep below, in the chamber of hours, one single clock still refused to tick. It was small and golden, its hands frozen at 12:04, and beneath the unmoving glass, something faintly shimmered, a reflection of the sea, calm now, eternal, waiting. The first sign came quietly. A child chasing a paper boat along the gutter noticed that the rippling water no longer flowed downhill. It moved backward, uphill against gravity, like a thought returning to its source. The child stared, confused, then laughed, assuming it was a trick of wind. But when she blinked, the street had changed. Cobblestones rearranged themselves into patterns she had never seen, and the air smelled of burnt iron and salt. By evening, Hollow Street was gone from every map. Those who had lived near it swore it never existed. Others remembered fragments, a shop perhaps, or a name they couldn't quite pronounce. Yet every clock in the city ticked a half-second too slow that night, as if time itself had drawn in a breath and refused to exhale. Lyra woke to silence. No ticking, no sound of rain against the window. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. When she stood, the floor beneath her rippled faintly, as though she were standing atop water. The world beyond her window hung still, clouds frozen mid-drift, leaves suspended in the air like insects trapped in amber. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Only it wasn't her. The reflection moved half a heartbeat too late, and its eyes were gold instead of gray. Lyra touched the window. The reflection smiled first. Then it spoke. "Do you understand it now?" She stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Who are you?" The reflection tilted its head. "You are, or rather, you were. The hour has turned inward. Time no longer knows which side of the glass it belongs to. The glass cracked from corner to corner. From within the fracture spilled faint light, the same golden shimmer she'd seen in the chamber below the shop. Lyra whispered, "No, I gave it back. I ended it." The voice inside the crack replied, "Nothing ends. Everything remembers." She fled into the streets, or what used to be streets. Buildings had shifted, their walls breathing slowly as though the city itself were alive and dreaming. Windows flickered with fragments of other moments, a sunrise looping endlessly in one pane, a snowfall frozen in another. People wandered through the mist, their outlines trembling, repeating the same gestures over and over, trapped in their own echoes. Lyra passed a man tipping his hat. He smiled, nodded, then did it again. And again. And again. Each time his smile grew a little more distorted, the skin around his mouth stretching like wax, softening under heat. She turned away, trembling. Everywhere she went, time was folding, bending back upon itself, replaying fragments of lives that no longer belonged to anyone. And through it all, she could hear the ticking, faint, rhythmic, patient, as though every clock in existence had gathered inside her skull. She clutched her head. "Stop! Please, stop!" The ticking paused. Then, from the silence, came a whisper. "Keeper." The word reverberated through her bones. She turned and saw them, silhouettes emerging from the mist, tall and narrow, their faces featureless except for the faint glow of golden gears turning beneath translucent skin. The Watchers. Eldrick had once mentioned them in passing. in one of his scattered notes, beings that existed where time gathered too densely, feeding on what slipped between moments. "Keeper," one of them said again, voice like grinding metal. "The balance fails. The sphere is broken." Lyra shook her head. "I don't know how to fix it." "You are its core," another replied. "Your pulse is its rhythm. When you falter, so does the world." "I never wanted this." "Want is irrelevant. The clock does not ask if it should tick. It ticks because it must." Lyra stumbled backward. The watchers did not follow. They simply turned in unison, faces tilting upward toward the frozen sky. Then, one by one, they dissolved into golden dust, carried away by a wind that did not blow. She found herself standing before the remains of the shop once more. Its windows were shattered, and from within came a faint sound, laughter, soft and familiar. She hesitated, then entered. The shop was no longer a shop. Its interior stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with floating gears, pendulums, and fragments of light suspended mid-motion. Staircases wound upward into nowhere. Doors opened into other doors. The floor reflected the ceiling perfectly, creating the illusion that she stood between two identical worlds, both trembling at the edge of collapse. The laughter came again, echoing from behind a row of floating clocks. When she turned the corner, she froze. Her brother stood there, older now, perhaps 20, though she had last seen him at 15. His smile was the same, uneven, gentle, but his eyes glowed gold. "Arlen?" she whispered. He nodded. "You found me?" Her heart leapt. "You're alive?" He tilted his head, considering. "Alive is one word for it. I am where he was. The one who built the cage, the one who thought he could steal time from the sea." "Eldrick?" Arlen smiled sadly. "He was only a fragment, the first keeper's last echo. When he broke, the burden needed another shape. It took mine." Lyra stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. "I can fix this. I can set it right." He reached out, touching her cheek. His hand was warm, too warm. "No, the moment has already begun to die. The city cannot hold its shape much longer. Time wants to return to the sea." "Then let it." He shook his head. "You don't understand. The sea remembers us now. If time floods back, it won't just erase the city. It will rewrite it. Every memory, every person, every hour that has ever passed will be unmade and remade differently. The world you know will become something else entirely." Lyra clenched her fists. "Then what do I do?" Arlen's gaze softened. "You end the rhythm. You let the clock stop." Her breath caught. "You mean die?" He smiled faintly. "No, you mean sleep. There's a difference. The keeper sleeps and time rests with her. That's the only way to stop it from unraveling everything." She stared at the countless clocks floating around them. Each one glowed faintly, ticking slower now, their sound blending into a low, mournful hum. "What happens if I don't?" He hesitated. Behind him, the air cracked, long, jagged fractures spreading across the fabric of space itself. Through them, Lyra could see other moments bleeding in. Faces she didn't recognize, cities made of glass, oceans burning gold. Arlen's voice was barely a whisper. "Then time will feed on itself. The world will become a single eternal second, an endless moment that never moves forward, never breaks, never dies." The shop began to shake. The floating clocks shattered one by one, their pieces dissolving into streams of light. Lyra fell to her knees, clutching her head as the ticking grew deafening once again. She screamed. The sound split the world. Light exploded outward, flooding every corner of the shop, every shadow, every thought. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing on the shore of a vast golden sea. Waves moved in slow motion, rising and falling as though uncertain of their purpose. The sky above was black and endless, and at its center turned the great eye she had seen once before, the Eye of Hours. It regarded her without emotion, the silent observer of all beginnings and endings. Lyra felt her heartbeat match the pulse of the waves. She whispered, "If I stop, everything stops?" The eye did not blink. "Then let it be peace," she said softly. She stepped into the water. The moment her foot touched the surface, the waves shimmered and turned to glass. The ticking stopped. The wind ceased. Even thought seemed to freeze mid-breath. Lyra closed her eyes and smiled. The sea swallowed her gently, not as a devourer, but as a cradle. Her body dissolved into light, then into countless particles of golden dust that drifted upward, scattering into the sky like faint, glowing seeds. The eye dimmed, the horizon folded inward, and the world slept. When dawn returned, if it was dawn, the city was whole again. The clocks ticked in harmony, each beat calm, steady, human. The sky was blue, the people alive, unaware of what had been lost. Only Hollow Street was missing. In its place stood a quiet garden filled with pale flowers that opened only at dusk. At the center of the garden stood a single sundial made of smooth gold. Its shadow never moved, and when the wind passed through the flowers, they whispered a name. Soft, tender, endless. Lyra. For months the garden remained untouched. Children passed it on their way to school and tossed pebbles into the fountain that never rippled. Lovers met at dusk beneath the sundial, unaware that its unmoving shadow stretched precisely toward a point no compass could name. And yet, sometimes, just sometimes, those who lingered too long heard it, a faint hum, softer than thought, rising from beneath the soil, a rhythm that matched no heartbeat, no machine, no wind. It was the sound of something remembering. The first to notice the change was a woman named Isla Ferren, a historian with ink-stained fingers and a mind that refused sleep. She'd spent her life chasing the forgotten edges of the city's past, neighborhoods that had supposedly never existed, census records with names that blurred when photocopied, blueprints for streets that led into empty fields. When she stumbled upon the Golden Garden, she knew at once it didn't belong. The architecture was wrong, the brick walls too old for the district, the stones underfoot worn smooth by centuries of footsteps that couldn't possibly have happened. And then there was the sundial. It cast a shadow even on cloudy days. It was subtle, easily dismissed, but Isla had the kind of eyes that noticed things the world preferred to hide. She returned every evening for a week, sketching the sundial from every angle, tracing its inscriptions, a ring of delicate symbols etched along its rim, too faint to read. When she rubbed charcoal across the surface, the markings appeared for an instant like bruises on metal, curling lines, almost like letters, yet not belonging to any language she knew. But one symbol repeated, 3 concentric circles around a single dot. Isla didn't recognize it, though she would dream of it that night. In her dream, she stood on a shore made of glass. The sea before her was still, reflecting a black sky filled with silent golden constellations. She saw a woman, faceless, graceful, walking barefoot across the surface, leaving trails of light behind. The woman turned toward Isla, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from inside the dreamer's lungs. Time remembers you. Isla woke before dawn, her heart pounding. Her hands were trembling, though not from fear, from recognition. She didn't know how, but she knew the dream wasn't just a dream. It was a memory, not hers, but someone else's. The next day, Isla visited the city archives. The clerk on duty, a thin man with coffee-stained sleeves, blinked when she asked for records on Hollow Street. "There's no such street," he said with the tired certainty of repetition. "I know," Isla replied, smiling faintly. "That's why I'm here." He frowned, searching his database. "We've had inquiries before, but nothing turns up. The name's not in the registry, not in zoning, not even in fire department reports. It's a ghost address. Maybe ghosts leave better trails than people do." He gave her an odd look, but handed over a folder labeled Obsolete Districts, Pre-Meridian Era. Inside were maps, some brittle with age, others faded to near blankness. And there, near the city's riverfront, she saw it, a faint scrawl in gray ink, half erased by time. Hollow Saint. Her pulse quickened. Beneath the label, written in smaller hand, was something else. A note. Closed 1879. Structural collapse due to temporal instability. She blinked. Temporal? At first, she thought it must have meant temporary. But as she turned the page, she found something stranger. A page torn from a personal diary, inserted long after the archive had been sealed. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and unsigned. "The girl has taken the rhythm, the clocks sleep. But the cycle will turn again when someone listens long enough to hear her name." Isla felt the breath catch in her throat. She ran her finger over the words. The ink shimmered faintly under the light, gold, not black, and when she looked again at the page, the writing had changed. It now said, "Welcome back, Keeper." For the rest of the day, Isla couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. Not in the physical sense, no footsteps, no shadows, but in the air itself. The world seemed to lean toward her as if listening. She stopped for coffee at a small cafe, and when she reached for her cup, she noticed the spoon vibrating gently, rhythmic, steady, as though responding to an invisible pendulum. Tick, tick, tick. The barista smiled nervously. "Old building," he said. "You feel it sometimes. The train's underground." But Isla knew there were no trains under this part of the city. That night, the dreams returned. The faceless woman was closer now. She stood before Isla, holding something small and shining in her hands, a pocket watch, its case cracked open to reveal a delicate mechanism inside. But instead of gears, there was a heartbeat. The woman whispered, "It's still ticking." Isla woke in tears, clutching her chest. Her own heartbeat had slowed to match the rhythm she'd heard in her dream. Days passed. Reality began to thin. Streetlights flickered in perfect sequence down entire blocks, their glow pulsing like a single vast organism. People began losing fragments of time, skipping minutes without noticing. A man would pour tea, blink, and find it cold. A mother would call her child's name only to realize she'd already said goodbye an hour ago. Something beneath the city was stirring. Isla walked the midnight streets, notebook in hand, documenting what she saw. She wrote about reflections that lagged behind their owners, about a cat that froze mid-leap for exactly 3 breaths, about bells that rang though no church stood nearby. And always, always, there was that rhythm. Tick, pause, tick, not constant, but alive. Sometimes it sped up, sometimes it slowed, as if testing its own limits. And the garden at the edge of the old district had begun to change. The flowers that once opened only at dusk now glowed faintly even under the sun. The air above the sundial shimmered, bending light like heat. When Isla approached it one evening, the hum she'd heard before deepened into a voice, soft, layered, filled with distant echoes. "Do you hear it?" it asked. She looked around. "Who's there?" "The clock remembers its keeper." "I'm not her." The voice paused. Then, "You carry her pulse." Isla backed away, trembling. The sundial's shadow shifted, only slightly, but enough to make her breath hitch. It moved, only for a second, but it moved. She whispered, "Impossible." The voice replied, "The world turns again. The dream stirs beneath your skin. When the last hour closes, another begins." A faint breeze swept through the garden. The flowers bent as if bowing. Then silence. Isla didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window. The city sprawled below her like a sleeping beast, its lights blinking in and out of rhythm. On her desk lay the old map, the page with the gold ink, and her sketches of the sundial. The symbol of 3 circles around a single dot stared up at her, luminous even in the dark. Without thinking, she reached for her pen and began to draw it again. Over and over, across the page, the wall, the table. Each line came easier than the last, as though her hand remembered it better than her mind. When she stopped, she realized the symbol wasn't static. It was spinning, slowly, faintly, the ink itself alive. And then came the whisper again, close to her ear this time. "Keeper." She turned. No one, only her reflection in the window, watching her, smiling, half a heartbeat, too late. By morning, the sundial was gone. In its place stood a narrow door made of brass and glass, set into the earth as if it had always been there. Across its surface was written a single phrase in letters of faint gold: "The hour waits." Isla knew, without knowing why, that it was waiting for her. Isla stood before the brass and glass door, every fiber of her being trembling between awe and fear. The words etched across its surface, "The hour waits," seemed to pulse in a rhythm that was no longer external, no longer separate from her own heartbeat. It was as if her pulse, her very life force, had been quietly synchronizing with some hidden clock beneath the city, a clock whose ticking had been buried for decades, waiting for someone to remember it. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold metal. It was unnerving how alive the door felt. When she pressed her palm against it, the brass vibrated gently, almost like a breath, and a warmth spread from her fingers into her chest. Slowly, impossibly, the door began to swing inward without a sound. No hinges groaned, no friction resisted her touch, only a quiet invitation to step inside. The corridor beyond was nothing she had ever seen. It was alive. The walls flowed like molten gold, twisting in liquid patterns that reflected her image, and then twisted it, stretched it, multiplied it. She watched her reflection walk ahead of her, raising a hand she had not yet lifted. Each step she took echoed, but not as sound, more like a resonance that threaded through her bones. "Keeper," the voice whispered, omnipresent and yet coming from nowhere at all. "You have come." Isla's throat tightened. Her own voice seemed distant, muted by the dense presence of something vast and conscious. She stepped further in, feeling the floor ripple beneath her feet as though it were a liquid surface, soft yet impossibly solid. Every sensation was magnified. The brush of air against her skin, the weight of her hair, the subtle hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The corridor twisted in impossible ways, bending in angles that should have been physically improbable. She passed through what felt like multiple layers of the same space. Her reflection would appear in one layer, then in another, sometimes ahead of her, sometimes behind, occasionally speaking words she had not yet formed. The golden threads of light in the air pulsed softly, wrapping around her limbs in gentle, invisible coils, drawing her forward. At last, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, the heart of the place. The ceiling arched impossibly high, shrouded in shadow and light, while the walls themselves seemed to pulse in time with an invisible rhythm. In the center of the room, sat a pedestal, and upon it lay the pocket watch from her dreams. Its cracked case glowed faintly gold, as if breathing. Inside there were no gears, only a small golden sphere suspended in the void, spinning silently. Around the pedestal, dozens of clocks floated in midair, each following its own irregular pace. Some spun wildly, some barely moved, others paused altogether, their hands frozen mid-tick. Yet despite the apparent chaos, there was an undeniable pattern, one that tugged at Isla's chest like a tether she could not resist. It was not mechanical. It was alive. "You hear it," the voice said again, now surrounding her entirely, vibrating through the very air. "The pulse of what was, what is, what may yet be. All times converge here, yet remain incomplete." Isla stepped closer to the pedestal, drawn as though by a magnet. The pocket watch floated slightly off the pedestal, and the golden sphere inside began to resonate in a rhythm that perfectly matched her own heartbeat. The threads of light in the chamber twined around her arms and fingers, responsive, as if they recognized her as something long lost. Her lips trembled. What am I supposed to do?" "You are the keeper," the voice said, "because you remember, because you listen, because you carry the pulse forward." She understood instinctively. The city had been fractured, its temporal fabric torn, leaving behind fragments that flickered in and out of existence. Paused reflections, lost minutes, children's voices echoing across time. All of it was waiting for someone who could stitch it together, who could lend their own rhythm to the broken heartbeat of the place. She was that someone. The pocket watch rose into the air, opening fully, revealing the golden sphere suspended in emptiness. When Isla touched it, the threads of light coiled around her hands, wrapping her gently in warmth and vibration. A shock wave rippled through the chamber. Time itself seemed to shudder, and all at once the clocks aligned. Their hands pointed to a single impossible hour, 12:60. The room itself shivered as if it were alive. Outside, the city fell silent. Streetlights froze mid-blink. Vehicles hung suspended on the roads. A child's laughter looped in the air. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. Isla felt herself pulled deeper into the rhythm. Her heartbeat was no longer hers alone. It was part of the pulse of the city, the pulse of Hollow Street, of time itself. A wave of understanding washed over her. The keeper was not merely a witness. She was the conductor, the bridge between memory and reality. The garden, the sundial, the golden threads, all of it had been waiting for her to respond, to place herself into the pattern, to breathe life back into the fractured rhythm of the world. "Will I be lost?" she whispered. "You will become the memory," the voice replied, resonant and tender, "and the world will remember again." Isla closed her eyes and pressed both hands firmly against the sphere. A surge of energy coursed through her, and for the first time she felt herself dissolving into the rhythm. She became light, sound, vibration. Every heartbeat in the city, every tick of every clock, every fragment of time she had witnessed flowed through her veins. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, yet fully herself. The clock's hands spun wildly, faster and faster, until the chamber became a blur of light and motion. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything aligned. The sphere glowed brighter than the sun, casting golden threads outward. The heartbeat of the city resumed, steady and unbroken. Outside, Hollow Street awoke. Streetlights blinked in perfect sequence. The air hummed with life. Children ran and laughed without a trace of the lost minutes. Cars moved smoothly through the streets. Time itself felt whole again, though slightly different, subtly aware. Isla opened her eyes. She was back in the chamber. the pocket watch now resting on the pedestal, inert, yet still warm to the touch. The golden threads had faded, leaving only a faint glow in the air. The corridor beyond the door was still alive, shimmering, waiting for the next keeper, perhaps, or for her to explore further. She breathed deeply, every inhale and exhale in perfect harmony with the restored rhythm. The task was done, yet she knew it was also only beginning. She had become part of the memory, part of the cycle, a living thread in the intricate web of time. And for the first time, Hollow Street felt like a place that truly existed, not just in maps or dreams, but in every heartbeat, every pulse of life. When Isla opened her eyes, she was no longer certain whether she stood in the chamber or had stepped back into the city. The golden threads that had woven themselves around her hands moments ago had disappeared, yet their resonance lingered in her limbs, vibrating in sync with every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of Hollow Street itself. She realized, with a sudden, dizzying clarity, that she could feel the city, its memories, its fragments of lost time, like a living entity, and it was looking at her, listening, breathing through her. Outside, the world had shifted. Hollow Street was no longer simply a forgotten alley, a ghost of maps and faded addresses. It had remembered itself. Streetlights blinked with a deliberate cadence, almost as if testing her awareness. Pavement cracks realigned themselves with perfect precision, the buildings leaning slightly toward the center of the street, like a choir bowing to its conductor. The garden that had been hidden in plain sight now shimmered even under the midday sun. Flowers bent toward her, opening their petals in a pattern that matched the rhythm she carried, and the sundial, once missing, hovered above the fountain like a suspended memory, its shadow stretching toward a point no compass could define. Isla's hands were trembling, but not from fear. She could feel the pulse everywhere, in the street, the buildings, even the people who wandered through her field of perception. Time itself was layered over the city like a translucent skin, and she could sense the fragments of skipped minutes, frozen gestures, and echoes of moments long past. A child paused mid-step, as if caught between breaths. A man lifted a cup to his lips, then suddenly felt that he had already finished drinking. The tiniest anomalies, a flutter of a bird's wing, the lag of a reflection in a shop window, all whispered at her, waiting for her to acknowledge them, to weave them back into the rhythm. She realized then that being the keeper was not a passive role. She was not merely a witness. She was a conductor, a guide, a living heartbeat integrated into the city's pulse. Every step she took aligned her further with the intricate machinery of time beneath Hollow Street. Each breath, each subtle gesture, sent ripples through the patterns she could feel. She tried to walk slowly, cautiously, aware that even the slightest misstep might unravel something delicate, perhaps irreversibly. A soft hum began beneath her feet, faint at first, then growing into a melody of distant gears, chimes, and unseen mechanisms. It was the sound of Hollow Street itself, waking, organizing, reconciling the fragments of its existence. The hum carried a voice, or rather a chorus of voices, whispers layered on whispers, echoes of people long gone, fragments of conversations that had been lost to time, all merging into a single, continuous thread. "You have returned," the chorus murmured, resonating in her mind rather than her ears. "The city remembers. Do you remember, Keeper?" Isla nodded, even though no one could see her, and she realized she was speaking aloud. "I remember. I see it all." The streets responded. A man stepped from a doorway, appearing to move in slow motion. His movements were exaggerated, deliberate, as if time had frozen him in mid-thought. Yet, as Isla focused, The lag corrected itself, and he walked forward naturally, none the wiser. A fountain splashed. The water caught in a suspended arc for an instant, then fell with renewed continuity. Reflections in windows stretched, bent, and finally settled into perfect synchronization. Every minor disturbance, every skipped beat, every temporal anomaly was drawn back into order, guided by her awareness, her heartbeat, her attention. Isla wandered further down Hollow Street. She saw small miracles she had never expected. A cat frozen mid-leap completed its trajectory perfectly when she blinked. A shopkeeper who had been reaching for a ledger suddenly found it already open in his hands. Letters left on doorsteps fluttered as if unseen hands had straightened them. Every gesture felt alive, purposeful, like the city itself was breathing in relief, slowly releasing centuries of tension it had carried in its fractured hours. The deeper she moved, the more the city seemed to acknowledge her. Shadows leaned closer to her path, bending light in patterns she could almost read as text, though she could not decipher the language fully. Street lamps pulsed gently, in rhythm with her own heartbeat, and she realized that she could accelerate or slow the tempo simply by will. When she ran, time stretched for her alone. When she paused, even the busiest alley seemed to hesitate, holding a breath. In the distance, the golden garden called to her again, the hum of the sundial's shadow vibrating through the air. As she approached, the flowers shimmered with increasing intensity, their petals glowing faintly with a golden luminescence. The fountain water rippled, despite there being no breeze, forming delicate spirals that pointed toward the sundial at the center. Isla knelt beside it, placing her palm on the stone. The symbols, 3 concentric circles around a single dot, glowed softly, alive with memory. She could see them shift, almost like letters dancing on the brink of speech. The vision returned. The faceless woman from her dreams appeared, her form shimmering between solid and spectral, standing on the glassy shore of Isla's memory. She held the golden pocket watch in her hands, and now, for the first time, Isla understood the connection. The watch was a vessel of memory, a container of the city's pulse, and she had become its living counterpart. "Time is whole again," the woman whispered. "But the cycle is not finished. Other fragments remain, other keepers will come, and you?" She paused, stretching a translucent hand toward Isla. "We'll teach them to listen." Isla felt a tremor of understanding ripple through her body. Being the keeper was not just restoration, it was stewardship. She could feel the rhythm of Hollow Street embedded within her, inseparable, intertwined with every beat of her own heart. Every moment she experienced was now a note in a symphony of memory, and the responsibility of harmony weighed on her, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The garden fell silent for an instant. Then the air vibrated with a new rhythm, subtler than before, almost imperceptible, threading through every alley, every doorway, every forgotten corner. It was a new layer of time, a hidden current, waiting for someone else to notice it, waiting for her to teach it how to be heard. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and felt herself expanding into the rhythm, becoming both observer and participant, guardian and teacher. When she opened her eyes again, Hollow Street appeared fully alive, yet impossibly different. The city moved with intention, as though aware of her presence. Windows reflected histories not yet remembered, footsteps traced forgotten paths, and the air thrummed with latent potential. Somewhere deep within, the mechanism of the old clockmaker stirred, responding to her pulse. She was not the end of the cycle. She was the conduit, the first of a new generation of keepers, the living heartbeat through which Hollow Street would continue to remember itself. Isla took a step forward, and the world around her flowed with her. The streets remembered, the clocks ticked, the shadows aligned, and the city exhaled as one living, breathing entity. She could feel every secret folded into its streets, every anomaly restored, every lost moment accounted for. And yet, as she walked, she knew that this was only the beginning. The hour was not over. The city had many stories yet to tell, and she would be there to guide each one, every single heartbeat, every suspended second, every forgotten whisper. The golden thread shimmered faintly in the air, invisible to anyone but her, connecting her to every corner of the city. She was Hollow Street now, and Hollow Street was alive. The days that followed were unlike anything Isla had ever known. Hollow Street had remembered itself, yet the city's pulse now hummed with complexities she had not anticipated. She could feel every skipped breath, every frozen shadow, every fragment of paused time still lingering beneath the surface like tiny whirlpools waiting for attention. She wandered through the streets slowly, deliberately, attuning herself to every nuance of the rhythm that now beat through her, guiding each step, each gesture. It was during one such walk, near the bend where Hollow Street curved toward the river, that she first noticed them. At first, they were subtle, figures that seemed to shimmer at the edge of her vision, reflections in shop windows that moved independently, always slightly out of sync. Then she saw one clearly, a young man sitting on the edge of a fountain that no longer flowed. His fingers traced patterns in the air, invisible to any passer-by, yet glowing faintly when seen through the corner of her eye. "You're the keeper," he said, voice soft but resonant. It wasn't a question. She realized instantly that he could feel her pulse, as she had felt his. "I am," Isla replied cautiously. "But who are you?" He smiled faintly, as if expecting the question. "Another keeper, but not like you. Not yet." He gestured to the street, where the light shifted in subtle waves. "There are others?" Fragments of time scattered across the city, fragments that need guidance. We are the first to notice each other. The city will always choose its keepers, but it rarely allows them to meet this soon. Isla felt a shiver run through her. The idea of other keepers, other humans connected to the heartbeat of Hollow Street, was both exhilarating and frightening. Each one would carry their own rhythm, their own fragment of memory, and she could already sense the interactions, harmonies, and dissonances that pulsed beneath the surface. "Show me," she whispered. She felt the words ripple through the street itself, and the city responded immediately. From the shadows of alleyways, other figures emerged. A woman carrying a notebook that shimmered as she wrote, her pen leaving trails of golden light. A boy whose shadow moved ahead of him independently, pointing toward something unseen. An elderly man, leaning on a cane, yet each step he took caused the pavement to ripple subtly, as if the street itself responded to his weight differently than it should. Each of them carried a fragment, a small anomaly, or a hidden memory, tethered to Hollow Street. Isla could feel them, one by one, like notes in a vast symphony waiting for her guidance. The pulse she had absorbed was now resonating outward, gently drawing them together, aligning their awareness. She realized with a sudden thrill that she had become more than a keeper. She had become a conductor, capable of weaving their disparate rhythms into the city's heartbeat. "The city," the first young man said, stepping closer, "has been fractured for longer than any of us remember. Each anomaly, each ghost of time, it's waiting, and we are its response. We are the ones who will listen when no one else can." A sudden hum rose beneath them, faint at first, then growing louder, as though the entire street itself was shifting. Shadows bent and swirled around them, forming intricate patterns, golden filaments in the air that wove themselves into ephemeral diagrams. Isla reached out instinctively, touching one of the threads, and a memory flowed into her. A market day decades ago, a man dropping a coin that rolled across the cobblestones and froze midair, suspended for an hour. The moment returned to its proper sequence, rolling naturally into the day's rhythm, and she felt a surge of satisfaction. A small victory for the city, a fragment restored. One by one, the other keepers followed her movements. The woman with the notebook traced symbols in the air, releasing memories of lost letters, of mislaid documents, of moments that had been skipped by forgotten clocks. The boy pointed toward frozen faces in shop windows, guiding them into their proper gestures. The elderly man tapped the pavement lightly with his cane, aligning small disruptions in the street itself. Puddles that hadn't rippled, debris that hovered mid-fall for hours or even days. The hum grew into a symphony, a layered resonance that pulsed through every brick, every stone, every fiber of the city. Isla could feel the network of keepers extending outward, threads connecting them to the anomalies, to the memories, to the very heartbeat of Hollow Street. And yet, within that harmony, she sensed an undercurrent, something not entirely aligned. Not all fragments responded immediately. Some resisted, some pulsed in their own tempo, subtly divergent, as if testing the authority of the new rhythm she carried. "Not everything will listen," the young man warned, his gaze following a shadow that flickered independently. "Some fragments are stubborn, some are old, older than the city itself. You may need to coax them, even persuade them, sometimes guide them through discomfort." "Discomfort?" Isla asked, feeling a tightening in her chest as she tried to locate the source of a sudden irregular beat beneath her feet. "Yes," he replied. "Fragments of time often retain emotion, anger, fear, joy, longing. They remember the feeling as much as the event. You can restore the sequence, but you must honor the memory, or it will rebel. The city does not forgive negligence." The wind shifted subtly. Though the streets were still, the air around them vibrated faintly, carrying whispers in no particular language, but meaning enough for those attuned. A door appeared in the alleyway, small, brass, like the one Isla had entered in the garden, but scaled differently, almost like it had grown from the very bricks. Another keeper emerged from it, a young woman whose hands glowed faintly as she moved them over the walls, releasing trapped sequences from decades ago. Isla realized then that Hollow Street was revealing itself, layer by layer. Each keeper was a key, a participant, a thread in a tapestry that had waited centuries for attention. The city's pulse was no longer hers alone, but the resonance of multiple minds, multiple memories, converging, harmonizing, and learning from one another. The golden garden awaited at the far end of the street, shimmering with anticipation. As the keepers walked toward it, the sun caught the petals of the flowers and the light fractured into intricate patterns that seemed to encode a language older than any map or record. Isla felt the threads of time ripple, each thread carrying her pulse, the pulse of the other keepers, and the echoes of the city itself. "Is this safe?" one of the new keepers whispered, glancing around nervously as shadows shifted around them. Isla considered for a long moment, feeling the rhythm deep within her, noting the tiny divergences, the anomalies that still resisted alignment. "Safe?" she repeated. "No, not entirely, but it is ours to guide. The city is waking, and we are its voice. We will learn together. We will teach it how to remember." The golden threads intensified, wrapping the keepers in a delicate, almost invisible network. Each heartbeat, each gesture, each memory carried resonance into the system. Hollow Street breathed, the streets aligning, the buildings straightening imperceptibly, the air vibrating with restored histories. The pulse was growing stronger, more confident, integrating the new keepers into the rhythm. And yet, at the edge of her perception, Isla sensed a faint, stubborn irregularity, a pulse that refused to synchronize, a fragment older than her, older than Hollow Street itself. It throbbed in opposition, a whisper against the harmony she had begun to weave. Isla's chest tightened as she realized the truth. This was not a single restoration. This was an ongoing symphony. Other fragments, other keepers yet to emerge, anomalies yet to reconcile, would challenge them. The city's memory was vast, infinite, and patient. It tested those who would guide it, ensuring that only those who could listen fully, who could feel and respond with empathy and understanding, could shape its pulse. She looked at the other keepers. Their faces reflected a mixture of awe, fear, and determination. The city had called them, and they had answered. Each of them carried the weight of time, the responsibility of fragments, the consciousness of moments suspended for decades. And Isla knew deep in her bones that the road ahead would not be simple. Some fragments would resist, some would fight back, some would demand more than patience. They would demand creativity, courage, and sometimes even sacrifice. But together they could guide Hollow Street into coherence, layer by layer, heartbeat by heartbeat. The golden garden glimmered ahead. Flowers bent as if bowing, water rippled gently in the fountain, and the sundial hovered above, its shadow pointing to a single, unmarked location, a point that no compass could define. The keepers gathered there, sensing the culmination of their first shared effort. "You are all connected now," Isla whispered, feeling the pulse of each keeper interlace with hers. "We are the voice of Hollow Street. The city speaks through us, and we listen. Together, we will restore what was lost. But we must remember, the city is patient, but it is not forgiving. Each fragment matters, each heartbeat counts, and some will test us." The hum beneath their feet swelled, carrying the resonance of centuries. Time itself had become a living river, and the keepers were its stewards, navigating currents seen only by those attuned to its rhythm. They had entered the first layer of Hollow Street's memory, but countless layers remained, each waiting to be restored, each demanding attention, empathy, and courage. Isla looked down the street, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. She could sense fragments flickering at the edges of perception, shadows that would require patience, diligence, and understanding. Yet for the first time, she also felt hope, a certainty that together they could guide the city back to wholeness, that Hollow Street could finally remember itself fully, layer by layer, heartbeat by heartbeat. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the restored streets, Isla knew the real work had only just begun. The golden threads that bound Isla to the pulse of Hollow Street had grown taut, vibrating with an intensity she had never felt before. The city was no longer simply waking. It was stirring, aware of the presence of multiple keepers converging upon it and reacting in ways subtle and profound. As the sun sank behind the distant rooftops, shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending around corners, looping back upon themselves as though time itself had begun to double back on the streets. Isla walked slowly, attuning herself to every rhythm, every heartbeat, every echo that vibrated through the city's veins. The other keepers followed her, moving in quiet synchronization, their own pulses threading into the larger pattern, forming a resonance that stretched across Hollow Street like a living organism. But beneath that harmony, she felt something else, irregularities, dissonances that did not align with her rhythm nor with the others. The first fracture revealed itself near the northern end of the street, where a row of abandoned townhouses leaned toward each other, creating a darkened corridor. As Isla approached, the air thickened, carrying the faint scent of old paper and iron. The pavement beneath her feet quivered subtly, and she noticed the shadows of the buildings moving against the laws of light, forming shapes that were not possible. Windows appearing and disappearing, doorways folding in on themselves. "This is different," the young man who had first appeared to her whispered, his voice tight. "This isn't a memory waiting to be restored. This resists. We have to be careful." The golden threads pulsed in response to his words. Isla could feel the pull like a heartbeat that did not match hers, a pulse that throbbed with defiance. She extended a hand, letting her senses reach into the space ahead. She could see fragments suspended mid-air, a woman frozen mid-step on the stairs, a child who had dropped a toy decades ago, their expressions locked in confusion. But these fragments weren't passive. They pulsed against her touch, tugging, resisting, almost aware that she was trying to guide them. She took a deep breath and stepped into the corridor. The air thickened further, vibrating with a low hum that made her teeth chatter. Time felt unstable here, elastic. When she lifted her hand to reach a frozen figure of a man reading a newspaper, the world around her stretched, elongating the moment so that minutes passed in her perception while only a heartbeat ticked outside. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to the other keepers. "Yes," the woman with the notebook replied. Her pen hovered over a blank page, trembling as though it were alive. She began to write, each stroke releasing a fragment of the frozen memory, yet even as she did so, the figure resisted, retreating slightly into the shadows, a ghost unwilling to rejoin reality. Isla felt the strain in her chest. She could feel the pulse of Hollow Street fraying here, a tension that threatened to unravel not just this corridor, but the rhythm of the nearby streets. The golden threads twisted, knotting around each other as if seeking stability. She placed both hands on the pavement, letting her pulse merge with the streets, feeling the vibration surge through her. "Focus on the emotion," the elderly man said quietly, tapping his cane against the ground. "These fragments aren't just frozen time. They carry feelings, echoes of fear, regret, longing. Align with the heartbeat, yes, but understand what they carry. That's how we restore them." Isla closed her eyes and let herself sink into the memory. She reached out mentally, touching the frozen woman on the stairs. She felt panic, a desperate urge to run from some unseen threat. She felt confusion and anger. She felt centuries of frustration trapped in a single heartbeat. Slowly, she allowed her own pulse to resonate with the woman's, softening, mirroring, acknowledging. She could feel the golden thread connecting them lengthen, stretch, and finally, the woman took a breath, her body trembling, her feet moving, rejoining the present. A ripple of success surged through the corridor. One by one, the fragments began to yield, though some required repeated attention. The young boy pointed toward another anomaly, his own pulse interacting with it, teasing the frozen moment into flexibility. The woman with the notebook scribbled tirelessly, releasing memories of letters that had never been delivered, receipts lost in time, conversations whispered in empty corridors. The elderly man tapped in rhythm with Isla, stabilizing the ground itself as if aligning the very molecules of the street. But the fractures were numerous. Each one carried its own resistance, its own emotional weight. A street lamp flickered erratically, throwing the surrounding area into brief darkness. And when the light returned, Isla saw a shadow that was not part of any person, a dark ripple stretching across the wall, pulsing with a rhythm distinctly separate from hers. It moved independently, circling the fractured corridor, almost aware of their attempts to repair it. "Something watches," the young man whispered. "Not a person, not a ghost. Something older." The golden threads pulsed sharply in warning. Isla felt a cold tendril of dread coil through her spine. This anomaly was not a simple lost fragment. It was something primal, an echo of time itself, resisting reintegration. She could feel it tugging against the street's pulse, creating tremors that she had to counterbalance carefully or risk further collapse. "Together," she said firmly to the other keepers, "we must synchronize. Let our pulses merge. Let the street feel our unity. We are the rhythm now. We are the conduits." They did so. Golden threads entwined their hands, their hearts, their awareness, creating a massive, living lattice of consciousness that resonated with the fractured time around them. The anomalies writhed in response, some yielding, some pushing back. Isla felt every surge as a tug on her very being, as though the city were testing her resolve, gauging her capacity to maintain harmony in the face of active resistance. The shadows pulsed again, forming shapes that resembled faces long forgotten, screaming silently before melting into the walls. Isla's pulse quickened to match them, not in fear, but in determination. She extended her awareness into the street itself, into every stone, every brick, every layer of history embedded in the pavement. Slowly, agonizingly, the fractured corridor began to stabilize. Time returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet Isla knew the fractures had not all been healed. The street, the city, the very heartbeat of Hollow Street was alive and alert. It had remembered, but it had also awakened to the presence of keepers and would test them relentlessly. Exhausted but resolute, Isla turned to the others. "We've done more than just restore," she said softly. "We've been recognized. The city trusts us enough to reveal its hidden layers. But the fractures are awake now. They'll challenge us. They'll test our understanding, our patience, our hearts." The young man nodded, his expression tight. "We'll face them together. But be warned, some fractures are not just lost time. They are memories of what the city fears. They will fight us, and some may be too powerful for even us alone." Isla swallowed, feeling the weight of her new responsibility. The golden thread stretched further, illuminating the path ahead, guiding them toward deeper layers of the city. The hum of Hollow Street pulsed steadily, yet beneath it she sensed dormant echoes, whispering, waiting. Some were fragments. Some, she wasn't sure. Some felt almost alive, independent of the city's pulse, as if anticipating their own roles in what was to come. And as night fell over Hollow Street, the shadows deepened, the streets whispered, and the fractures began to stir, more active now than ever. Isla realized with a chill that this was only the beginning, the true test of the keepers' abilities, their unity, and their courage. The city had remembered, yes, but it had also awakened something older, something that had lain dormant beneath time itself, waiting for the moment when the first keepers would step forward. Isla inhaled deeply, letting the pulse flow through her, through all of them. They had faced fragments. They had restored moments. But the fractures had awakened, and now Hollow Street was alive in ways she had never anticipated. A living, breathing entity, vast and sentient, ready to challenge every step they took. With a final glance down the illuminated fractured corridor, she whispered to herself, "We are its voice, and we are ready." The night was thick and alive with possibilities. Hollow Street stretched before Isla and the other keepers, illuminated by the soft glow of golden threads that hummed in the air, forming an intricate lattice above every pavement stone, over each building, and through every shadowed corner. The fractures had multiplied since the previous evening. They were no longer subtle dissonances hidden in corners. They had become restless, vibrant, almost sentient. Time was calling to them now, testing their resolve, their unity, their understanding of the city's pulse. Isla led the group down the street, each keeper connected to her through invisible currents of light. The young man, steady and focused, walked beside her, his eyes scanning every flicker of shadow. The woman with the notebook traced golden symbols in the air, guiding minor fragments into alignment. The elderly man's cane struck the pavement with precision, grounding them. Even the boy, small but attuned, led her toward pockets of suspended time that flickered like dim stars. "They are stronger tonight," the young man said quietly, his voice taut. "They know we are here. The city has woken fully, and the fractures are aware." Isla nodded, feeling the rhythm pulse through her chest. Each heartbeat was amplified, echoing into the streets, into the buildings, into every hidden layer of the city. She could feel the resistance ahead, a dark rhythm that moved against theirs, pulling, twisting, straining. It was older than the city itself, a memory that had existed before the streets had been laid, before the sundial had cast its first shadow, before the golden garden had existed. The first fracture appeared as they turned a corner near the old theater. The air shimmered, bending light into impossible angles. Shadows separated from the objects that cast them, forming jagged, elongated shapes. A man, frozen mid-gesture, his expression etched with panic, twisted unnaturally, resisting the golden threads Isla wove. The water of a nearby fountain froze in mid-splash, droplets suspended as though caught between moments, ripples reaching outward like the tremors of a living organism. "Focus," Isla whispered to the keepers. "Feel the rhythm, not just ours, but theirs. Let them speak. Let the city guide us." They obeyed. Golden threads flowed outward, wrapping around each fragment. Isla reached toward the frozen man, and instead of pulling him forward forcibly, she allowed her pulse to match his, subtle and empathetic. She felt his fear, his confusion, the weight of a lost hour pressing into him. She let her heartbeat resonate with his, a slow, steady metronome that began to guide him back into alignment. His limbs trembled, then moved naturally. The water in the fountain rippled and fell as it should, but the fractures continued, each one more complex, more resistant. A narrow alley shimmered with a sickly green gold light. Figures moved there that were not quite human, nor fully memory, echoes of past keepers, perhaps, or residual fragments of those who had once tried and failed. Their faces were blurred, shifting between anger and sorrow. They whispered without sound, a low vibration that tugged at Isla's mind. "We can't force them," the woman with the notebook said softly. Her pen left trails of gold as she traced symbols over the suspended fragments. "We have to listen, understand what they want. They aren't just broken moments. They are conscious in their resistance." Isla closed her eyes and felt the pulse beneath her feet, beneath her hands, beneath her chest. She reached into the fractures, not with strength, but with understanding. The whispers became clearer, a chorus of fragmented memory and raw emotion, regret, fear, longing, hope. They were not hostile. They were incomplete, untended, yearning to be acknowledged. Slowly, agonizingly, Isla guided them heartbeat by heartbeat. She allowed her own pulse to stretch outward, interweaving with the others. The keepers followed suit, each aligning their own rhythm with hers and the city's. Shadows dissolved, frozen water fell, gestures completed themselves. Even the flickering lights of distant buildings straightened into coherence. Then, at the heart of the street, the central fracture revealed itself. A vast emptiness stretched across a courtyard, a void where time refused to exist. The golden threads trembled and wavered as they approached it. It was larger than anything Isla had encountered, a wound in the city's memory, pulsing with a chaotic rhythm, threatening to unravel everything around it. She could feel centuries of pain emanating from it, echoes of lost keepers, forgotten fragments, collapsed streets, and unrecorded histories. "This is it," the young man said, voice low. "The city's memory. The original fracture. If we can't integrate this, nothing else will hold." Isla took a deep breath, feeling the golden threads vibrate in anticipation. She stepped forward, placing both hands upon the invisible lattice, letting her heartbeat resonate through the void. It was like touching infinity. She felt every layer of Hollow Street, every fragment, every ghost of lost time, all converging into a single, pulsing knot. She felt fear, doubt, exhaustion, but also clarity. This was what she had been preparing for, to become one with the city, to conduct its pulse, to restore the rhythm fully. The other keepers joined her, their pulses entwining with hers. The young boy extended his hands toward the void, tracing arcs in the air that released trapped memories. The woman with the notebook traced symbols along the edges of the fracture, unlocking histories that had been sealed for decades. The elderly man struck the ground with his cane, stabilizing the foundation of the city itself. Golden threads surged outward, intertwining with the void, reaching into its chaotic heart. And then it resisted. The void pulsed violently, tugging at their minds, threatening to tear the threads apart. The whispers grew louder, now almost screams, fragments of lost time, old regrets, unresolved histories demanding acknowledgement. Isla felt herself bending, nearly breaking under the pressure. Her heartbeat faltered, her hands shook, her consciousness strained against the pull. "You are stronger than fear," she whispered to herself. "You are its voice." She focused, centering herself in the rhythm, letting her heartbeat flow like a river, steady and relentless. She reached out, not with force, but with understanding, empathy, and patience. She let the void speak, absorb, acknowledge. Slowly, impossibly, the chaotic pulse began to align with hers. The golden threads stretched into it, weaving through every layer, every fragment, until the emptiness trembled, then shimmered, then filled. Time returned. The courtyard expanded into coherence. Shadows aligned. Frozen moments moved naturally. Water flowed. The city exhaled. Hollow Street had remembered itself fully, every street, every building, every whisper restored. The keepers collapsed to their knees, exhausted but exhilarated. Isla looked around, seeing the city alive in a way she had never imagined. Buildings leaned toward each other in subtle harmony. Streetlights blinked with gentle cadence. Reflections shimmered perfectly in every window. The golden garden glowed softly at the far end of the street, its sundial hovering above the fountain, casting a shadow pointing toward a place no compass could define. "You did it," the young man said, voice trembling. "We did it." "No," Isla whispered, breathless, feeling the pulse of Hollow Street flowing through her, through them. "The city did it. We only listened." The faceless woman from her dreams appeared before her, shimmering between the air and memory, holding the golden pocket watch. She extended it toward Isla, who reached out and accepted it. The sphere inside glowed faintly, its heartbeat now in perfect synchrony with hers. "Time remembers," the woman said, voice echoing in every corner of the city. "And now it remembers you, Keeper. You are its pulse, its voice, and its heart." Isla felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully absorb the enormity of what had happened. She had entered the city, connected to its hidden heartbeat, faced its fractures, and restored its memory. Hollow Street had awakened, whole, alive, aware, and she had become part of it. The other keepers rose beside her, each holding their own fragment of restored memory. They were no longer separate. They were integrated, a living network of understanding, empathy, and rhythm. The city flowed through them, and they flowed through the city. A perfect cycle. Isla looked down the street one last time, golden threads shimmering faintly in the air, illuminating every corner, every shadow, every story waiting to be remembered. The fractures had been healed, the city's pulse complete, but she knew it would continue to evolve, as all living things do. And she would be there, always listening, always guiding, always remembering. For the first time in centuries, Hollow Street was at peace. Its memory was whole, its pulse steady, and its heart, her heart, beating in perfect synchrony. And somewhere beneath the streets, deep in the layers of time, the original clockmaker stirred. His mechanisms had been silent for decades, yet now they moved, guided by a pulse that was no longer his alone. The city remembered, the keepers watched, and time, fragile, delicate, eternal, continued to flow. Isla smiled. She felt the rhythm in every breath, every step, every heartbeat. Hollow Street had awakened, and she had become its voice. The golden thread shimmered gently, then faded into the night, leaving only the quiet, steady heartbeat of a city finally at peace.